Hello, hi everybody. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we will be talking about Micro-Frontends, Scalable Teams, and writing a book. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 7,000 right now, and CTO Craft provides them with one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, curated Slack community where you can find me or Luca, I think, as well, and events like this one. So huge thanks to our headline partner, AWS, and our partner, the Software House, for making the Bytes events possible. I'm Marek Gajda. I'm scalability expert, technical enthusiast and consultant, and CTO at the Software House. And today I have a very special guest with me, Luca Mezzalira.
Hi, everyone.
AWS Principal Solutions Architect and author of a freshly released book, Building Micro-Frontends, which will be the topic of today's discussion. By the way, I totally recommend this book. Great read, not only if you want to learn more about micro-frontends, but about software architecture in general. It's a very good read. Luca, a couple of words about you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. As you said, I'm a principal architect in AWS, working in UK and Ireland for media and entertainment sector. Before that, I was a vice president of architecture in a company called The Zone, based in London, but with a global reach. Currently, The Zone is a OTT platform similar to Netflix, but for live sports. And is available in 220 countries. So we really had quite a lot of fun before, and now I moved last year in AWS. Was another interesting journey so far, so quite happy to be here today.
Yeah, congratulations on that, Luca. And yeah, basically the show is live. So I see that already somebody put something in the chat. If you want, feel free to write anything. It really encourages us as a speakers to see that there is some audience, and there is also a space for questions. We have 1 hour, so there will be for sure some space to answer any kind of questions that you have. There is a button down there, something like here, ask a question. So if you want to, please do anytime, and I will try to somehow fill it into our conversation. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about micro-frontends. So the first most obvious question, because some people might don't know, what is a micro-frontend?
Yeah, that's a question that I heard several times. So back in the days when I started this journey on micro-frontends, obviously there wasn't even a term micro-frontends. So it's been a while that I'm working on this topic. So I figure out to find an answer for this question. So what is a micro-frontend? If I have to explain to someone, I should be able to say that. So let's start with the official definition that I created. That is basically micro-frontend is a business representation of a subdomain. So if we are familiar with domain-driven design, we know that we usually when we work on an application that is a domain, we tend to divide the application in subdomains and then subdomains in bounded context. A portion of the system. And should be aligned with the business domain, because I believe that is the key differentiator between a micro-frontend and a component. Very often people are using those terms interchangeably, but in reality, in my opinion, there is a strong separation between the two. Then micro-frontends also are independent artifacts, so I can deploy them independently without the need of compiling everything together and so on. And also might be developed with same or different technology choice. Now, on this topic, is a bit controversial because very often people says, oh, my micro-frontends are perfect because I can use Vue, Angular, and a gazillion of other UI frameworks together. The reality is the best practices that we have learned in the hard way in the past on how to build single-page applications should be used also for micro-frontends. Therefore, despite you can, it doesn't mean you have to use multiple technologies. I think there are some situations where using different technologies could help. For instance, if you are migrating from a monolithic code base towards micro-frontends, for a certain amount of time, I personally would accept, and I think the customer as well, a transition period where you have like the old Angular framework and you are migrating to the new Angular framework. And yes, you are downloading a bit of more kilobytes, but in reality, you're doing that in an iteratively fashion, so providing value, immediate value to the customer. So that is, in my opinion, acceptable. The other thing is when you do, for instance, an acquisition. So if you acquire a company and you want to get value immediately out of the box, you can take wherever technology was developed, the application, and plug inside your, let's say, main framework or main application using micro-frontends. So that definitely are situation where, in my opinion, is acceptable because the benefit for the customers are overcoming the technical challenges. The last thing on the definition of micro-frontends is around ownership, where it's important to highlight that nowadays a front-end team or even a cross-functional team should own end-to-end the build and deployment, not only the development of a specific application. I truly believe that front-end developers should understand a bit of CI/CD deployment and so on. And without that, you wouldn't be able to optimize and leverage this distributed system at its own entirety, because the fact that you have the power to optimize heavily your micro-frontends is also part of, and also obviously deploying and maintaining your code in production is also part of this new mindset of decentralization towards the teams more than centralized with a team that is responsible for everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's also like a subtitle of your book is Scaling Teams and Projects and Empowering Developers. And I think this is also apart from the technical perspective of scaling as a matter of performance of the system. Actually, what we are struggling more right now is scaling the teams and scaling the projects in a manner of how to actually figure it out with the developers and how to empower them, right? And I think this is one of the solutions. So how the solution actually like empowers the developers?
Yeah, sure. So when I started my research, I had to figure out what were the benefit of distributed architectures outside the front end, obviously, because many people are thinking, oh yeah, but at the end you have microservices, and if I use microservice, everything will be distributed and decoupled, and everyone will work in a happy place. The reality is not. Distributed architectures provides quite a lot of complexity, and sometimes the benefit are not as many as you expect in certain configuration. Therefore, there is a line that is connecting the communication between teams, the organization structure, and the architecture that can be summarized very well by the Conway's law that back in the 70s, Marwell Conway was stating that usually we design system based on the organization structure. That for me is more, let's say, modern than anything else, because often we forget about that. Often what we do is taking an architecture or an organization structure was working in a completely different context, maybe in a different industry, and apply without any tweak inside our organization and see failing miserably. In reality, it's very important with distributed architectures to think about the holistic thing. So it's not only, okay, I want to have independent teams, but what does it mean creating independent teams? It means that you need, first of all, to decentralize the decision making. Obviously, not for everything. because you need to have anyway certain characteristics that has to be respected across the entire application. Yes, it's true, we want to create autonomy, we want to optimize for speed of delivery, but at the same time, we want to have control that everything that we're doing is in line with security best practices or the way tools that we are using across the entire organization and so on and so forth. So usually there is a shift of mindset that I have seen where tech leaders, principal engineers, architects, platform team, if we're talking about the famous cloud center of excellence that is nowadays very popular in many organizations as a centralized team, they need to shift from, let's say, dictating or defining every single detail for the teams to provide guardrails and then allow the team to operate inside that guardrails. And the thing that for me, every time that I work in this kind of environments, is very surprising is the fact that there is so much novelty and so many interesting ideas that are bubbling up between teams because they are closer to the problem. We, to a certain extent, architects and the platform team are closer to different problems. They are a trade-off between business needs and technical things. But a team that is doing coding 5 days per week, 7 or 8 hours per week, per day, is always a great, they are in the best position to making some codes. Obviously, not everything. There are certain things for controlling the cost of infrastructure, controlling, for instance, the security model is maintained. That has to be, to a certain extent, centralized. But if you think about that, you start to have some guardrails that are provided to the teams, and the teams can really find the right solution for the problem, the business problem that they are defining. That's why also there is this link between domain-driven design and Micro-Frontends that is very, very important, but any distributed system, and to be honest, because the reality is if we are capable to identify potential and very ideally, if you want, a team with including product, because product is part of the team, we cannot really detach that is able to handle product details, front end, back end, infrastructure autonomously, you are basically recreating a small startup inside a large organization that can leverage the strength of a startup for the speed of delivery and the independence. And then for sure, at some point, there will be some touching points, but you are trying to minimize the external dependencies, providing instead a clear guideline how to, let's say, move forward. And I think is very important to think in this way, because we are finally reaching a certain maturity that sometimes could lead to some challenges, obviously, because more junior teams, maybe we struggle with this freedom at the beginning, and then we need some mentoring or coaching on certain areas. But at the same time, we are providing, let's say, a blank canvas where they can grow and they can have skin on the game. And very often people are leaving companies mainly because they are struggling to see the latest technology. They are struggling with their managers because they are micromanaging them, or maybe with the tech leaders that are maintaining a certain cohesive and coherent architecture or code base. But in this way, we are instead trying to provide them let's say, a place where they can really strive and they can really feel the ownership. And I think is very, very key nowadays.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned like micromanagement, and I just thought to myself that micro frontends and microservices are exactly opposite of micromanagement. So please don't like connect those two things together. Okay, but from what you say, it's also about changing the whole mindset of the organization and how people work. So when companies should like adopt it, should it be from the beginning or at some stage, or what if I already have like a big organization? What cost it brings?
Yeah, sure. So I don't believe that distributed architectures should be something to embrace day one for a startup or for a brand new project. I think if we think about we want to create the code infrastructure for generating benefit for our customers, because at the end it's not for our business, it's for our customers that we are generating benefit. At the beginning, we need to test our idea, we need to test our assumptions, see if they works. as we thought and as we planned, or we need to twist. And I think there, in that journey of validating the idea, there is a lot of learnings that are coming in, and then we can reuse later on for scaling the business. There are some times, although, that we already know that a business or an idea could work, and in that case, yes, you could start with distributed architectures. So in this case, Micro-Frontends, especially if you have a large organization, because let's say that distributed architectures are not solving only a technical problem. I would say that they're solving mainly organizational challenges. Because the fact that you want to create independent teams and you want to have reduced external dependencies are clearly more organizational challenges. That's something that are impacting the customer, or directly impacting the customer.
And what about the refactor? Because what I see nowadays is that everybody has already some legacy code or some legacy system. And is this some solution to maybe rewrite or refactor the system step by step?
Sure. I think the nature of Micro-Frontends that allows you to have independent artifacts means also that you will be able to deploy them independently. And if we learn from what we have seen working in other architectures like microservices, canary releases and strangler pattern, blue-green deployment, all those best practices will allow you to de-risk the deployment of your Micro-Frontends. Now, for a migration, like you were talking, Marek, regarding an existing application that should be refactored to Micro-Frontends, if you think about the strangler pattern that basically allows you to slowly but steady kill a portion of your application in favor of a new one, but maintaining these for a certain period of time, these two applications running in parallel, it might be the right solution for a company, because in that way you can say, okay, this specific view, this specific URL will be in Micro-Frontends, all the rest will be with the monolithic application that I have before. And then slowly but steady you are migrating everything. Obviously, the benefit, there are several benefits of this approach. I really not suggest to go in stealth mode and develop for 12 months a Micro-Frontends application and then deploy, because usually you are losing a lot of time for, let's say, validating certain ideas and also trying production your code, because obviously it's different. When you try that.
I also call it chasing a rabbit, because usually in this 1 year, this existing system grew so fast and changed that when you finally finish with your work, actually it's not valid anymore.
It's true. And that's why I suggest, because of the nature of Micro-Frontends, we can work iteratively. So we can build one portion of the application, deploy in production, learn from there. And also, for instance, one thing that I realize often is in front end, especially observability is something that we don't spend too much time usually when we have a single page application, when we have a server-side rendering one. Instead, with Micro-Frontends becomes key, like it is for microservices, because now you have potential multiple teams working on the same view. Who is responsible for the bug that was raised in production? And you need to, especially for sensitive workloads where maybe you have like supporting healthcare companies, or you are working on a live stream platform, understanding where the problem is in seconds is mandatory, because it's basically you are creating a very compelling experience for your users that they cannot use, mainly because you don't understand where the bug is. And I think the investment around that is another key part of thinking about embracing Micro-Frontends.
Yeah, because there is lots of, I would say, DevOps work around it, right? There's, well, exactly the same as with microservices, right? You have still have to have this kind of very well architecture of the whole stuff to see the logs, to see the observability, as you said, and to have control over that. And maybe speaking about microservices, because You also mentioned it a couple of times, and I also hear a couple of guys saying, okay, so micro frontends are basically microservices, but on the front end. Is this true? And maybe do you need microservices to create a micro frontend, or this is a separate thing?
There are people are thinking if I have microservices, I have to use micro-frontends or the other way around. I personally don't think it's true because from backend and frontend, if we're thinking about technically speaking, can be decoupled, no matter that you're using cross-functional teams or components teams through API contracts. At the end of the day, if you are developing a feature end-to-end, for instance, there will be always a front-end developer that has to consume some API that is exposed by the back-end developer. Now, if you can do that in a cross-functional teams, happy days. But sometimes it's not feasible, either for instance, some challenges, organizational challenges, or because you have too many front-end targets to cover. I give an example. In my previous company, we have several living room devices to cover with different technologies, different programming languages, mobile, native, iOS and Android, and web. If I want to create a cross-functional teams around a specific feature, I should have 20 people with different expertise. That is not feasible. It's not going to work. We decided instead to divide per practice. So we had a web front-end team, a iOS team, Android team, and so on. And then we had teams on the back end. And the way that how they interacted, it was through API contract. That was, in my opinion, a very smart way to handle that, because in reality, you decouple basically the communication flow using engineering practices that are quite common, that they are happening inside a specific squad or pod or whatever you want to call it. But in reality, you're applying distributed across the entire application. In this way, we basically didn't have any first-class citizen on the front end, because usually you could say, oh, we could have web and backend. But in reality, the consumption model that we had, vast majority of the time, our users were consuming our application from living room devices, and having and let's say creating an API that could be helpful for web but not for living room devices, it wasn't an option. So we decided to go in that path and trying to foster this cross-contamination between teams when the time comes to create an API. Then we need to bear in mind an API is forever, as we all know. And therefore, when you define an API, it's not going to change in a week, or it's not going to change in a month. So you need to maintain that for a long time, especially when you have packages to deploy and you need to wait that the user are updating their application and so on and so forth. So that model could work despite you using monolithic architecture or micro-frontends or microservices, whatever. So the answer is no, you don't need to have both together, but there are ways that you can use for making distributed architecture working with monolithic ones.
Yeah. Well, anyway, in your book, you write that micro frontends are really not a silver bullet, right? And you are not totally against monolithic apps, isn't it?
Not at all. I think back in the days, if you think about that, we have server-side rendering or isomorphic applications and single-page applications. And those are clear architectures that are monolithic architectures at the end, because that's how we interpret so far. What was missing on the front end was having an architectural approach to the front end. So far, the vast majority of the development in the last, I would say, 5-6 years, probably 10, was I pick a framework, someone else has already selected the architecture for me, I just implement what I need to do on top of the framework or the bunch of libraries, if you think about other UI frameworks. But and that was it. Instead, here we are asking to revisit your architecture skills on the front end as well. That for me was extremely exciting back in the days when I started, because it was a while without having this opportunity. And I believe there is, For distributed system has a very clear, let's say, environment where I see them working, like when you want to scale the organization, when you want to reuse a lot of stuff, and you want to grow organically and so on and so forth. But monolithic architectures are still there. And I personally suggest on a day-to-day basis on my customers, because potentially you don't need to fragment everything and start immediately with the most difficult architecture we know so far. You can go even in a hybrid way. So you can go with a monolithic or semi-monolithic, like they call modular monolith architecture, where you divide by domain. So you are ready for the next stage if and when it comes. And you are dividing using best practices and modularity on your code. So for instance, using encapsulation at the domain level, understanding how you are going to decouple the different parts. And then if tomorrow you notice that specific domain is growing or drifting in a way that it wasn't completely unexpected, you can carve it out from the monolithic architecture and start to build by its own. But still, you don't need to go from a unique code base to gazillion of distributed systems. You can go in this middle ground where you can prepare yourself for the future without the need of doing a massive investment upfront. Because in reality, I think we need always to think what is the real value for our users.
Yeah, so as always, flexibility is a key in IT. Especially right now, actually not the fastest wins, but the most flexible win. Okay, we have a questions. It's I'm not sure if we can answer this question, but at least we can try. So Daniel asks that there seems to be a lot of Aureli's book that complement each other. It's learning DDD, building microservices, fundamentals of software architectures, and of course, micro-frontends, which we are talking about right now. And the question is, was this planned, or was it just people coming to similar conclusions?
I think,
Luca?
yeah, I can answer that. It is completely, I think, is a clear statement where the architecture world is going. So domain-driven design is raising popularity, and that is the given, because we started to see books like Team Topologies and starting to see more conferences around domain-driven design, more talks about domain-driven design. So that is a given, because we realize that it's very, very important shaping the architecture properly. Build Microservices is the second edition, so it was there for a while. I read that back in 2014, 2015. Amazing book if you didn't read it. And Fundamentals of Software Architecture basically was a collection of, if you follow Neil Ford and Mark Richard, that I personally do because are my heroes, it was a collection of their talks and what they believe. Fantastic thing, in my opinion. And mine basically was covering the front end part, because no one was doing from an architectural perspective. For instance, if you think nowadays, there is another book that I would add on that list, that is Data Mesh. And data mesh is another interesting thing. And I thought a lot about that, because now we started with microservices, that is distributed system on the backend. We moved to Micro-Frontends, and now to the data layer. So that means potentially a team could own end-to-end the front end, the back end, the data layer, the infrastructure, and it's fantastic. The level of decentralization that we can arrive in the future, it means that it's opening up the doors to new way to think about software, in my opinion. But to answer your question, it's completely casual, but I think it's basically showing the direction where we are going.
Yeah, I can. I totally agree. I see the same pattern here. That well, if you look at this term DDD, actually, it was like popular 15 years ago, 10 years ago. It was like this first wave of DDD. But I think the technology wasn't really ready for that, at least to some extent. And there really was this kind of idea that business should understand technology and technologies should understand business, because this is how I see the DDDs, that actually we start to speak a common language. And I think that technology wasn't mature enough. And now we are at this point where we finally can have this famous Lego blocks that that there are independent services, and we can really divide the application in the way that it reflects the business. So I think that this is this new wave of DDD coming right now, and this is also how O'Reilly reflects it, the situation in their books. And okay, and speaking about the book, because this is also very, very interesting for me. To be honest, my marketing at some point said to me like, "Hey, you, Marek, should write a book." And I said, I think that this is way more complicated than you thought, than you think, right? And so what's your approach on that? I know that you are not like a professional writer in the sense, right? You are more like a technical person. So how was it to actually write the book for O'Reilly?
Yeah, so this was my second book. The first one I wrote in 2017, and it took me 10 months. This one was definitely more challenging for several reasons. First of all, no one, I couldn't, let's say, consult anyone. It was more based on my experience.
You're a king of a castle.
And no, it was difficult because,
Yeah.
there are a lot of things to try, and the approach that I have taken, it wasn't the traditional one, I would say, because I started, so it took me 2 years to write a book. That is normal for a book that is roughly 300 pages. And the approach that I've taken was very community driven, if you want. So I started very early days to do talks, write articles publicly, so you can still find them and you can still read them, and started to understand how the people were reacting to certain concepts that were, I cannot say different, but let's say different from the normal way how you interpret front-end development. And at the beginning, there was a huge pushback. So there were big names in the front-end community that were saying, "Oh, Micro-Frontends are never seen the light of the day. They are just nonsense. You have this problem, that problem." So I collected all these complaints, and I wrote an article that took me 2 days for writing, that is available on Medium. Is I Don't Understand Micro-Frontends is the name. And they are basically I was taking the main ones, the one that were coming more often, and trying to explain my take on that. And it's still a very successful article, to be honest. The other thing that I've done is at the conferences, I received a lot of feedback, questions, and I received a lot of other information. And in the meanwhile, I was developing Micro-Frontends on living room devices, web, mobile. So it was a very interesting moment for me that time. I started to discuss with other people that were starting the journey at the same time, more or less, of me. So there were a few companies that were doing that. I directly engaged with those people that were bubbling up the first new frameworks. I tried to engage with people, for instance, for having a better understanding which challenges they are facing. And then in my spare time, I started to consult companies for free. And I started to say, okay, so you want to go with Micro-Frontends, what challenges you are facing? And the challenges were becoming always the same, constantly the same. And so, okay, so those are the topics that I need to write for, because if we already solved those, and I know how to solve them, and what are the possibilities. So I arrived basically to December 2020, sorry. That was the book was two chapters away, so almost done. And then I almost stopped, because I realized that I had to do more. So when I joined AWS, basically I spent the first 7 months consulting tens of customers around the world in different industries, same topics, same challenges. And then I finalized the book, adding all those new learnings that I had done at scale, because at the beginning was just me trying to speak with the people. But in this case, where them calling AWS for solving those challenges. And now I have seen quite a few, and that for me was useful, because I finalized the last 100 pages basically in 6 months. But it was on purpose. Potentially, I could have finished earlier, but I thought that the last 6 months were extremely helpful, because I tweak some part. I added new ideas, and still, now that I'm socializing, the book is out, I'm socializing with other people, is very interesting because we have a bunch of new ideas in the community. We are exploring, and there is a lot of collaboration between people that are working on this topic.
Yeah, and you write it like from how do you write how I read? So from the first page to the last page, or is it rather like you have multiple chunks and then you have to somehow mix them together? And
the latter. So there were some parts that for me was clear, and they wouldn't change, let's say, drastically in the time that I was writing the book, but others had to be as updated as possible. So for instance, the technical part that are basically the analysis between architectures, the implementation, and a few other things, that was the last 6 months, basically. The rest of the year and a half, I worked on the CI/CD challenges, and that didn't change too much from all the studies that we have done in the past. There are certain things around automation and testing and stuff like that that there are some tweaks, but it's not too crazy, because I think with microservices we already found quite a few challenges and solved them. The other thing that I have done is trying to take the perspective from describing a scenario, because I think if we understand the context, we can find the right solution. In fact, in my book, you won't find gazillion of stuff or a gazillion line of codes, because if I provide you the mental model, you will be able to then, despite the framework that is coming out in the future, you will be able to apply those mental models in any framework. It doesn't matter what is going to come out. And that was great. And that's why also I try to modularize my writing. And obviously the first few chapters, I went from 1 to 3 immediately. Then I jumped towards the CI/CD, and then I did the organization structure 1 and so on. And I ended up with the latest and greatest information on the technical side.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the discussion about implementing microservices. We have one more question, which we tackled a little bit. So what is the roughly size of the team or business from which it makes sense to consider micro-frontend? You mentioned also in your book that it's not maybe for everyone. So what's your experience in that?
Usually, I recommend to look into the topic when you have, I don't know, 4 teams that are working 4 or 5 teams that are working together in the same application. So that means roughly, depends from the size of the team, but it could be from 20, 25 to 35 people that are working on the same application. That potentially is a good size for starting looking into it. Then if you have more than that, definitely something that I would recommend. Obviously, one thing that I want to highlight, it's not the only way to scale your team. You can even have a very strong modularity inside your code base, and it might be enough. But the benefit that you are gaining with Micro-Frontends is also the possibility to change or try new things without affecting the entire code base. And also the cognitive load that is reduced for teams. Instead, if I'm, let's say, a new joiner and I need to understand this massive code base that maybe is 10 years that you are maintaining, I don't have to do that with Micro-Frontends. I am assigned to a team that has its own domain. I just need to speak with my peers for that specific domain, and it's way faster the onboarding for new developers, and also the fact that they can contribute, because that is another thing we need to think about. It's not only we're not writing code just for the sake of the beauty of writing code. We are writing code for effectiveness, for creating something that is useful for people. And those are also, in my opinion, some characteristics that are can be leveraged with distributed systems.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian, for this question. If you have more questions, please write them down. Speaking about also this scaling, there's one very interesting thing for me to think mentally we might discuss for a couple of minutes is this vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Can you say a couple of words about this concept? What is vertical and what is horizontal? Because it also shines a little bit of light on how you can divide those teams.
Yeah, sure. So vertical usually means that you divide on, let's say, a vertical domain. So, for instance, if you have a small team, like we said before, 4 or 5 teams, starting immediately with having multiple Micro-Frontends owned by different teams in the same view, it might be a challenge. Instead, if you start, let's say, with more coarse-grained, let's say, definition where you take, I don't know, the catalog, the authentication, the help or customer support, and so on, it could be let's say, a fast way to handle things and maintain a cohesive and coherent experience anyway. And then you can always go more granular if needed. One thing that when I started this journey, I analyzed, it was the main challenge when you have multiple Micro-Frontends in the same view that is horizontal, basically would mean that you need to think very thoroughly about the organization structure. It's very, very key that you analyze, okay, so if I have 3 teams working on the same view, who is responsible for the final outcome? We need to have someone accountable. And who is this team? Is the most senior one? Is the one that has more skin in the game? But anyway, they need to coordinate and work together with the other teams to make sure that they're not blowing up the entire application at runtime. That could be a huge problem. In the other way, you have way less problems, because at the end of the day, in vertical split, you could just have, let's say, a team responsible end-to-end for an artifact that could be represented, technically speaking, by a single HTML page or a single page application. And in that case, the less things could go wrong, because it's completely empowered by the same team to take care about the code base. So in that case, it's easier. Obviously, when you start to grow a lot, moving towards an horizontal split is definitely the best way to handle the things. You can go also a bit hybrid. You can have solution where, I don't know, some part where you see that there are an overlap of domains. The classic example I usually do is my account. So if you develop my account, you have probably user details, that is one domain. You have the payment, this is another payment details, that is another domain, and maybe you have settings and other things. So those are different domains that in this case you could have multiple teams working together, and that you kind of have like a vertical split for a portion of the application and a horizontal split for another one. That's the beauty of what you can do. But obviously you need to treat those approaches differently, because the challenges are different.
Yeah, and can you then switch from one model to another, or this is just a one shot?
No, it's you can switch. Obviously, it's easier when you move from a vertical split to an horizontal one, because obviously in horizontal you are going to have multiple teams responsible for one page or for one view or multiple views, and then you are asking this team to hand over the code to another team that is taking the entire stack. That usually is more difficult. But if you start more coarse grain and then you go more fine grain, I think you are in a good position then to make the call if it's needed to go more fine grain, and how.
Yeah, and we have a question from Fahad. So the communication between Micro-Frontend are mainly based on API and event-based, and are there any cases where Micro-Frontends can communicate to each other directly? I know the answer, but Luca, please do. And if yes, then there are some frameworks or approaches on the market right now, I think, right?
Yeah, I know pretty much the problem you're talking, Fahad, and the answer is no, there isn't other ways, at least in my opinion, because the moment that you are communicating directly, you are coupling artifacts, and I cannot change anymore an API independently. If I work with a pub sub pattern or a way for decoupling the producer and the consumer, then I can evolve those two things independently. The moment that instead I'm saying, oh, I shared a global state between micro-frontends, you are basically having the anti-pattern that in microservices is called modular monolith. It's how it's called. Okay, so basically you have the words of both words. So you are going to have a monolithic, distributed monolith. Actually, we are distributed monolith that basically is an anti-pattern where you have the words of both words. You have distributed architecture, but in reality you deploy in a monolithic fashion. And usually when you have that kind of situation, they always tell you, go back to the whiteboard and start to understand where it's failing, because there is something fundamentally wrong. And it's the same for micro-frontends. At some point, the fact that you're sharing or directly call a micro-frontend is going to bite you, and you don't know when it's happening, but when it's happening, it's going to be painful.
Yep. But by the way, Fahad asked about frameworks. Maybe not the direct frameworks, but there are some ready-to-use solutions. So maybe the question is, as far as I've seen, most of the micro-frontend things are built from scratch and are very custom. But I also know that there are some frameworks. So what to choose? Build from scratch or something already done?
Personally, I would say the framework are now mature enough, in my opinion. Depends if you're using server-side rendering or client-side rendering. For instance, few to mention, single SPA is one that has like 6 or 7 years that is in the trenches and is used extensively. Module Federation is fairly new, but is battle tested with several large organizations using it. There is Holocron that is developed by American Express, that is a server-side rendering framework. There is a Podium that has been a while that are available there, Puzzle.js. There are Nova is another one. There are many frameworks out there. Open Component is another one that are used at scale and are battle tested. And I obviously the thing is there, I don't suggest any framework. Also in my book, I said, listen, I cannot suggest a framework because it depends from the context. What are your architecture characteristics? I usually start in that way. What do you want to optimize for? Because you cannot optimize for everything. You cannot have extreme reusability and decoupling between teams is something that you cannot have. Are two forces that are diverging. You need to find the trade-off. And it's very important also for frameworks to understand what you're optimizing for. Is SEO the most important thing? Go with that framework that allows you to do so. Is I don't know, client-side rendering the thing that you're looking for, and you want to use standards without using Webpack because you don't know that? Single SPA could be an option, or you can go with even web components and or even iframes. We were discussing before the live with Marek. There are some companies that they created a framework. It's called Luigi framework that is based on iframes. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with that, despite you need to understand when to use that. For enterprise customers, that is their case, that they are using for internal apps. iframe is a fantastic solution because it's solving gazillion problems. You don't have clashes between the container and iframe. You can communicate between them. You don't have memory leaks. It's solving many problems, but probably for or even for a desktop application, like the Spotify desktop application was built in that way. So if you open it up, you can find iframes and multiple single page applications that are running in there. But if you probably have a website and e-commerce that has to be optimized for SEO, is something that I would not recommend.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as you mentioned, Spotify, it's also like one case that I know that what micro frontends are good for, or maybe you can confirm or not. Yeah. To make this, there is this famous case that in Spotify the search engine stopped working, but actually the rest of the page was working pretty fine, and this was because of the micro frontends, and so you have this a graceful
degradation.
Yeah, and And is that true? You can really build a software in the way that some parts are failing and some are still working?
Totally. It's totally doable because of the nature of distributed systems. So you have a module that potentially has a fault, and it depends, obviously. But for instance, in the case of Spotify, because it's running in iframe, the JavaScript stack is different, so it cannot, let's say, clash between them. But in the case of, let's say, if you have the same application running inside the same stack with the same scope and everything, you could handle the fact that you are, for instance, not able to load a specific Micro-Frontends, and that potentially you can have a replacement or hiding a portion of the view if it's not important, or even redirecting the user to 4.4. The options are endless, but because you have that modularity, you can really think about the different capabilities that, or also user experience that you want to present to your customers.
Yeah. And what about like these analytics tools? I was wondering how it works, because from time to time we have a client that says that, can you just please paste this small JS code at the beginning of the page, because I got it. It's like Hotjar or any other tool that client is promised that, yeah, you will just paste this one line and we'll do the rest. Will it still work with Micro-Frontends?
It does, because usually if you think about client-side rendering, you are going to load an application shell that basically contains stuff like this one. So like the Google Tag Manager of the case, where you have there, and the application shell that contains Micro-Frontends will live for the entire user session. So there is no changes compared to what you had before. On the server-side rendering one, you basically, by design, you load one page, and when you have a link to another page, you will refresh everything. So the Google Tag Manager or analytics tool that you're going to use is going to keep this user session because it's associated to a specific ID. So in both cases, you can implement that, and you can definitely track wherever you need also with Micro-Frontends.
Yep. Okay. So let's say that some of us were like really excited about this thing, what we were talking about, and they start thinking about, okay, so I really have to do it in my organization. So what are the next steps? Where to start? What to do first?
But first of all, it depends how you learn. Usually, I'm a big fan of understanding how people learn, because you can suggest the right path. For me, is always starting with the proof of concept. So if I have an idea, I need to start with the proof of concept, so I can research on specific challenges that I'm facing for that specific idea, and see how to solve in a smaller scale, and then start to see if it could be applicable in a larger scale. Personally, I would recommend to start with POCs, because you can start to really feel what it means building Micro-Frontends. And then obviously online you can find nowadays quite a lot of interesting information, and there are large organizations start to embrace Micro-Frontend and share back with the community. I was in a conference a couple of weeks ago where some engineers from PayPal that are using Micro-Frontends were discussing how how PayPal are doing the communication between Micro-Frontends. It was extremely interesting, and I was quite happy to see that basically they were using everything that I was suggesting in the last 7 years. So it's great, because it's validating once again that what you have done is valuable and is used. So in general, is start to if you prefer reading books, you can find free books at the moment. I know that there are that are available on Micro-Frontends. For videos, if you go to YouTube, you can find really a lot of videos on Micro-Frontends. And yeah, those are the main things that you could start. It really depends which level you want to start. Personally, I think if you need to sell Micro-Frontends internally, starting with a POC and showing the real benefit that you can deploy quickly, independently, fast feedback loop, the fact that you can change one portion of the application, reducing the blast radio that a bug could have, are all benefits that obviously, in my opinion or my eyes, might overcome the challenges that you face on the other side for handling distributed system. But once again, bear in mind, size matters. So if you are 3 developers and working on that, it doesn't make much sense. You can achieve modularity and some of the benefits of Micro-Frontends also with strong engineering practices.
Yep. Okay, thanks. And are there any specific technologies or languages where micro-frontends are better? Well, this is the JS, this is the front-end. So basically, we are talking about frameworks.
Yeah. You have also, if you think about that, currently there are quite a few people exploring on iOS and Android. So with native code.
But you mean like React Native, or you mean like
no? Also with, for instance, in Android, it's been a while that you can load remotely some modules at runtime, and that potentially could enable you to use the console Micro-Frontends on Android. Obviously, on mobile, you have different considerations. Like if I download an application that is basically loading everything externally, is it the experience that I want to have for my customers? Might be yes, the answer, or not. It depends what is the application about. But maybe you want to have in the package some portion of the app, and then you load externally only what you need. But it could be another way for updating your application without going through the submission every time that you have a small update.
Okay, so this is about the mobile. I still think because you haven't mentioned once in this book name React, I believe. And you did it on purpose?
No, I mentioned React. There is an art. There is the code example that is in React, but I didn't mention React because I wanted to be fair with all the frameworks, because it's an architecture, it's not a UI library what we're talking about, and it has to work with React, Vue, I don't know, Marco, Preact, whatever it is out there. So it's very, very important for me, this thing. So I think React is moving towards a very interesting, let's say, they introduced in React 17 and 18 quite a few interesting features. In 17, they allowed the possibility to have a virtual DOM that is composed by React elements from different versions. So I can have like one component in React 18 and one component in React 17 living together in the same DOM. That is the first interesting thing. That is for migration. So that they sold this feature for migration, but that also means they are looking into the fact that they want more modular fashion. And then they introduce in React 18, that is not available yet, is in beta, server-side components. So the possibility to just atomically reload a portion of the application. And that, for me, basically, we are heading towards a future where Micro-Frontends with just React could be doable. But again, I don't want to solutionize too upfront. Obviously, I can see that is not too far away, but I need to try deeply when React 18 will be stable and available.
Yeah, but it also clearly shows that this is the way that the world is going right now. As we discussed, O'Reilly is publishing books about DDD and decoupling of the teams and creating this kind of distributed systems. React is working on that, so this seems to be like a future for now, or at least a trend that will stay with us. Okay. Thank you, Luca, very much for talking today. We are almost end. I will share you a couple of. I will just paste you on the chat the links to Luca and to me, and a couple of links. I think also for the book. We have linked my LinkedIn website about Micro-Frontends, and LinkedIn to Luca. And his Twitter, if you want to copy that from the chat window. We are also on the CTO Craft Slack if you want to discuss something. And Okay, just one announcement about the next event. Next event will actually be on the Friday. It's CTO Craft Bytes compliance in the cloud. And compliance in the cloud, other very interesting topic. It's heaven or hell. Also, pasting you a link to this event if you want to check us out on Friday. And thank you very much for today's event. Thanks, Luca. Thanks to the audience. Thanks for questions, and see you next time.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a nice day.
Bye, Luca.